What's the moment you realized your family was never going to change and you had to save yourself? The moment I realized my family would never change was when my mother handed my sister the keys to my grandmother's house during the funeral reception while I was standing right there holding the will that explicitly left it to me. My sister Claudia smiled and thanked Mom for being so generous while my father nodded approvingly and my brother Aaron clapped. I was holding a legal document proving the house was mine and they were just giving it away to Claudia because she'd always been the favorite. I said quietly that grandmother left the house to me in her will, and Mom turned to me with this cold expression and said the will was just a formality, and the family had already decided Claudia should have it since she was getting married next year and needed somewhere to live. You're single and have an apartment. Claudia needs a house for her family. Stop being selfish, Iris. Dad added that I should be happy for my sister instead of trying to ruin her engagement celebration. My brother said I was always causing drama at family events. Claudia hugged Mom and said she knew the family would take care of her because they actually loved her unlike some people. I looked around at my parents, my siblings, and my aunts and uncles who were all nodding in agreement, and I understood with absolute clarity that nothing I said or did would ever matter to them because they'd already decided I didn't count. I walked out of the reception holding the will and drove to my apartment in shock. My grandmother had died 3 days earlier at age 89 after a long illness. I'd been her primary caregiver for the past 2 years, visiting her daily, managing her medications, taking her to appointments, grocery shopping for her, and staying overnight when she was too weak to be alone. Claudia had visited maybe 5 times in 2 years, always staying less than an hour and spending most of the time on her phone. Aaron lived in another state and never visited at all. Mom and Dad stopped by occasionally but complained the whole time about how depressing it was to watch someone deteriorate. I'd given up promotions at work because I needed flexibility to care for grandmother. I'd broken up with my boyfriend of 3 years because he said I was too focused on my dying grandmother to give him attention. I'd spent my savings paying for things Medicare didn't cover, and grandmother had known all of this. That's why she'd updated her will 6 months before she died, leaving me her house and the contents of her savings account. She'd told me explicitly that she wanted me to have security after everything I'd sacrificed for her. The house was worth approximately $400,000 and her savings account held $75,000. My grandmother had been a careful saver her whole life and she'd wanted me to benefit from that. I sat in my apartment that night reading the will over and over, and my phone kept buzzing with messages from my family. Claudia sent a text saying she was so excited to start renovating the house and asking if I wanted to help since I'd spent so much time there. Mom sent a message saying the lawyer would handle transferring the deed to Claudia's name, and I shouldn't worry about the details. Dad texted that he was proud of me for being mature about this decision and supporting my sister's future. Aaron sent a laughing emoji and said I'd better not try to fight this because the whole family was against me. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called the attorney who'd helped my grandmother draft her will, a woman named Patricia Rothman who'd been grandmother's lawyer for 30 years. Patricia's voicemail said her office would reopen Monday morning. It was Saturday night and my grandmother's funeral had been that afternoon. I left a message explaining what had happened at the reception and asking her to call me as soon as possible. Then I took photos of every page of the will and uploaded them to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. I had a feeling I was going to need evidence and I wasn't taking any chances. My family's certainty that they could just ignore a legal document told me they'd been planning this for a while. Patricia called me Sunday morning and her voice was sharp with anger when I explained what my family had done. Iris, your grandmother specifically updated her will to leave you the house because she knew your family would try to claim it. She told me 6 months ago that she was worried your parents would pressure you into giving everything to Claudia. That's why we included very specific language in the will stating that the bequest was to you alone and could not be contested on grounds of family need or fairness. Your grandmother knew your family and she wanted to protect you. Patricia asked if I had the original will and I said yes, it was in my possession. Good. Don't let anyone take it from you. I'm filing the will with probate court first thing Monday morning. Your family cannot legally transfer property that belongs to you regardless of what they decided at the reception. The house is yours. The savings account is yours. Your grandmother made her wishes clear in a legal document and those wishes will be executed. She paused and then asked if I thought my family would try to challenge the will in court. I said I didn't know, but given their reaction at the funeral, I wouldn't be surprised. Patricia said she'd represent me for free because my grandmother had been a dear friend and she wasn't going to let my family steal what was rightfully mine. Iris, you're about to see your family's true colors. Be prepared for them to turn on you completely. People show who they really are when money is involved. Monday morning, my phone exploded with calls and texts. Apparently, Patricia had filed the will with probate court, and my parents had received notification that the estate would be distributed according to legal documentation, which meant the house and savings went to me. Mom called me 12 times before I finally answered. Her voice was shaking with rage. How dare you go behind our back to a lawyer? We told you the family had decided about the house. You're being incredibly selfish and destroying your relationship with Claudia over a house she needs more than you do. I raised you better than this. I asked if she'd raised me to respect legal documents and honor the wishes of deceased relatives. She said that was different because the will didn't reflect what grandmother really wanted. She'd been confused and manipulated in her final months. I pointed out that grandmother had updated the will 6 months before her death, when she was still mentally sharp, and in fact, Patricia had required a doctor's certification of mental competency before allowing the changes. Mom said that didn't matter because family was supposed to take care of each other, and I was being cruel to Claudia, who'd already started planning her wedding around having the house. I asked when exactly Claudia had started planning to take my inheritance. The line went dead. Mom had hung up on me. Dad called 10 minutes later, and his approach was different. His voice was calm and reasonable, the tone he used when he was trying to manipulate me. Iris, honey, I understand you're upset about how things were handled at the reception. We should have talked to you privately first. But you have to understand that Claudia's situation is urgent. She's getting married in 8 months, and she and Daniel need a place to live. You're doing well at your job, and you have your apartment. You don't need a whole house. What you're doing right now is tearing this family apart over material possessions. Is that what grandmother would have wanted? I said grandmother specifically wrote a will detailing exactly what she wanted, and that document gave everything to me because I was the one who'd sacrificed for her while everyone else ignored her. Dad's tone shifted immediately. We didn't ignore her. We were busy with our own lives. You chose to spend all your time with a dying old woman instead of building your career and finding a husband. That's not our fault. And now you're trying to punish Claudia for living her life successfully. You're jealous that she's getting married and you're still alone. That's what this is really about. I hung up on him and blocked all their numbers. I was done listening to them rewrite history and blame me for wanting what my grandmother had explicitly left me in a legal will. Claudia showed up at my apartment that evening. She knocked on the door, and when I looked through the peephole, I could see she'd been crying. I didn't open the door. She knew I was home because my car was in the parking lot. She started talking through the door, and her voice was shaking. Iris, please let me in. I need to talk to you. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. I thought we were sisters. I thought you loved me. Mom and Dad said grandmother wanted me to have the house, and you're going against her wishes because you're bitter about your life. Please don't ruin my wedding over this. Daniel and I were going to raise our kids in that house. We were going to make it our family home. You're destroying my dreams. I stayed silent. She kept talking. I know you spent time with grandmother, but that doesn't mean you get to take everything she had. The house should be shared with the family. We should all benefit from her life. You're being greedy and selfish. Please, Iris. I'm begging you. Don't do this to me. I'll never forgive you if you take that house from me. I waited until she stopped talking and left. Then I called Patricia and told her Claudia had shown up at my apartment trying to guilt me into giving up my inheritance. Patricia said that was harassment, and if it continued, we could get a restraining order. Document everything, Iris. Every call, every text, every visit. Your family is going to escalate, and you need evidence. The next 3 weeks were hell. My family launched a coordinated campaign to pressure me into giving up the house. Mom called my employer and told my supervisor that I was having a mental health crisis related to grief and might need time off. My supervisor called me into her office confused about why my mother was contacting her about my personal life. I explained that my family was trying to steal my inheritance and were attempting to sabotage my job. My supervisor, a woman named Linda Cho, listened to the whole story and then said if my family contacted my workplace again, she'd have them banned from the premises and would consider it harassment of an employee. Dad showed up at my apartment building and told my neighbors I'd stolen money from my dying grandmother and was refusing to return it to the family. 3 neighbors asked me if it was true, and I had to explain that I was the legal heir and my family was lying. My brother Aaron started a Facebook campaign claiming I was a greedy sociopath who'd manipulated our grandmother into disinheriting everyone else. He posted old family photos with captions about how I'd always been jealous of Claudia and was finally getting revenge by stealing her house. Claudia shared the posts and added comments about how betrayed she felt. Extended family members I barely knew started commenting that I should be ashamed of myself. I documented everything. I took screenshots of every social media post, every text message, every email. I kept a log of phone calls with dates, times, and content. I recorded Claudia's visit to my apartment on my phone. I saved the letter Mom sent to my employer. Patricia told me to create a binder with all the evidence organized chronologically. Your family is creating a narrative that you're the villain. We need to show a pattern of harassment, manipulation, and attempts to circumvent legal processes. This will all matter when the will goes through probate and if they try to contest it. Patricia filed a motion with probate court to expedite the process, given the harassment I was experiencing. The judge assigned to the case, Honorable Marianne Kowalski, reviewed the evidence of my family's behavior and scheduled a hearing for the following month. My family would have the opportunity to contest the will if they wished, but they'd need to provide legal grounds beyond just wanting the assets distributed differently. Patricia said most will contests failed unless there was proof of undue influence, lack of mental capacity, or fraud. My family had none of those things. My grandmother had been mentally competent when she updated her will, and there was medical documentation proving it. Patricia had followed all legal requirements. The will was airtight. 3 days before the hearing, my parents showed up at my apartment with Claudia, Aaron, and 2 people I didn't recognize. They knocked on my door at 8 p.m., and when I looked through the peephole, I saw 6 people standing in the hallway. I called Patricia immediately. She told me not to open the door and to call the police if they didn't leave. I told my family through the door that I wasn't letting them in, and if they didn't leave, I'd call the police. Dad said they just wanted to talk and work this out as a family. I said the time for talking was over and everything would be decided in court. Mom started crying loudly, saying I'd destroyed our family and she'd never forgive me for this. Claudia pounded on the door and screamed that I'd ruined her life and she hoped I died alone with no one who loved me. Aaron kicked the door hard enough that I heard the frame crack. I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher my family was at my door threatening me and one of them had damaged the door. The dispatcher said officers were on the way. I announced through the door that the police were coming and my family should leave immediately. I heard arguing in the hallway and then footsteps running away. When the police arrived 5 minutes later, my family was gone, but the door frame showed damage from Aaron's kick. The officers took photos and wrote a report. I gave them Patricia's contact information and explained about the inheritance dispute. One officer said this was clearly harassment related to a civil matter and suggested I file for a restraining order against my family. The probate hearing happened on a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. I sat in the courtroom with Patricia, while my family sat on the other side with their attorney, a man named Douglas Finch, who specialized in estate disputes. Judge Kowalski read through the file and then asked if the family was contesting the will on legal grounds. Finch stood and said they were challenging it based on undue influence. He claimed I had manipulated my grandmother during her final months when she was vulnerable and scared, convincing her to leave everything to me despite the fact that she'd always intended to divide her estate equally among her grandchildren. Patricia stood and presented the medical records showing my grandmother was mentally competent when she updated the will. She also presented a letter my grandmother had written to the court, which she'd given to Patricia along with the updated will, explaining exactly why she was leaving everything to me. Judge Kowalski read the letter aloud. My grandmother's words filled the courtroom. I am leaving my house and savings to my granddaughter Iris, because she is the only family member who cared for me during my illness. Iris sacrificed her career, her relationships, and her savings to ensure I was comfortable and safe. My other grandchildren visited rarely, if at all. My daughter and son-in-law found my illness burdensome and unpleasant. Iris gave me dignity and companionship when I needed it most. This is not undue influence. This is earned gratitude. Judge Kowalski set the letter down and looked at my family. Do you have evidence that contradicts this statement? Do you have proof that the testator was mentally incompetent, or that Miss Iris Mendoza exercised undue influence beyond providing care for her grandmother? Finch shuffled papers and said the family's position was that Iris had isolated the grandmother from other family members and created a situation where she felt obligated to leave everything to Iris out of guilt. Patricia responded immediately. Your Honor, we have phone records showing that the other family members rarely called the deceased. We have visitor logs from the assisted living facility where the deceased lived for her final 6 months, showing Iris visited daily while other family members visited fewer than 10 times total. We have testimony from the deceased's doctors and nurses stating that Iris was the only family member consistently involved in care decisions. The deceased was not isolated. She was abandoned by everyone except Iris. Judge Kowalski asked my family if they had any evidence to support their claim of isolation. Finch said no. Their position was based on family knowledge of the situation. Judge Kowalski's expression made it clear what she thought of that argument. She ruled that the will was valid, executed properly, and reflected the genuine wishes of a mentally competent testator. The house and savings account would be transferred to me as specified in the will. My family had 30 days to appeal. Court was adjourned. My family didn't appeal. 30 days later, the house and the money were legally mine. Patricia helped me set up the property transfer and access to my grandmother's savings account. The total value of my inheritance was approximately $475,000 once everything was calculated. It wasn't a fortune, but it was financial security I'd never had before. I could pay off my student loans, invest for retirement, and have a down payment for a home if I ever wanted to sell grandmother's house and buy something else. Patricia suggested I sell the house immediately because my family knew where it was and might try to damage it or harass me if I moved in. I agreed. The house went on the market within a week and sold within a month for $425,000. I netted $400,000 after closing costs. Combined with the savings, I now had close to $500,000. I paid Patricia $10,000 for her legal services, even though she'd said she'd work for free. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. She'd saved me from my family's theft, and I wanted her to be compensated. She accepted the money and told me to use the rest to build a life away from my toxic family. You won, Iris. You got justice. Now get out of this city and start over somewhere they can't find you. I took Patricia's advice. I quit my job and told Linda I was moving out of state to escape my family. Linda understood and wrote me an excellent reference letter. I found a new apartment in Portland, Oregon, packed my belongings, and left without telling anyone where I was going. I blocked all my family members on every platform. I changed my phone number. I set up all my accounts with passwords they couldn't guess. I told my few remaining friends not to give my family any information about my location. One friend asked if I was overreacting, and I showed her the binder of evidence documenting my family's harassment. She looked through the screenshots and the police report and said I was absolutely making the right decision. I moved to Portland in January and started over. I rented a nice one-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. I lived off the inheritance while I looked for a new job. I interviewed at several companies and got an offer from a tech startup that needed someone with my skills in data analysis. The salary was better than my previous job and the culture was supportive. I accepted and started in February. I spent the first few months settling into my new life, exploring the city, making new friends who knew nothing about my family drama. But my family found me 6 months after I moved. I don't know how they got my address, but in June I came home from work to find Claudia sitting in the lobby of my apartment building. The doorman hadn't let her up because she wasn't on my approved visitor list, but she'd told him she was my sister and needed to talk to me urgently. I walked into the lobby and froze when I saw her. Claudia stood up and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Iris. I know you didn't want to see me, but I had to come. We need to talk about what you did to our family." I told her to leave immediately or I'd call the police. She said she wasn't going to hurt me. She just wanted 5 minutes to explain how my greed had destroyed everyone. The doorman was watching us carefully, and I could see he was ready to intervene if things escalated. Claudia started talking faster. "The inheritance you stole should have been split 4 ways. You took $500,000 that rightfully belonged to all of us. That means you owe each of us $125,000. I'm here to collect my share. You can write me a check or transfer it electronically, but I'm not leaving until I get what I'm owed." I stared at her in disbelief. She actually thought she could come to my home and demand money that legally belonged to me. I told her the court had ruled the inheritance was mine and she had no legal claim to any of it. She said the court was wrong and our family had decided to handle this privately since the legal system had failed. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Claudia's smile disappeared. "What are you doing? I'm your sister. You can't call the police on me." I told the dispatcher my sister was at my apartment building harassing me and refusing to leave after I'd asked her to go. The dispatcher said officers were being sent. Claudia's face turned red. "You're calling the cops on me? After everything you did to our family? You stole our grandmother's money and now you're having me arrested?" I said I hadn't stolen anything. I'd inherited assets left to me in a legal will that had been upheld by a judge. She said I was a liar and a thief and she wasn't going to let me get away with this. The doorman stepped between us and told Claudia she needed to leave the building immediately. She ignored him and stepped closer to me. "You think moving away makes you safe? We know where you work. We know where you live. You can't hide from this. You owe us that money and we're going to get it one way or another." The police arrived within 10 minutes. Claudia was still in the lobby, now yelling about how I'd destroyed the family and stolen her future. The officers asked for both our IDs and listened to my explanation about the inheritance dispute and my sister's harassment. I showed them the police report from the incident at my previous apartment and explained I'd moved to Portland specifically to escape my family. One officer asked Claudia to explain her side. She said I'd manipulated our grandmother into leaving me everything, and now I was refusing to share with my siblings as I should. The officer asked if she had any legal claim to the money. She said no, but morally it should be shared. The officer told her she was trespassing and needed to leave immediately. If she contacted me again, she'd be arrested for harassment. Claudia left the building escorted by the officers, but before she got in her car, she turned back and shouted that this wasn't over and I'd regret what I'd done. I filed for a restraining order the next day. The judge granted a temporary order and scheduled a hearing for the permanent order in 3 weeks. I documented Claudia's visit with statements from the doorman and the police report. At the hearing, Claudia showed up with Dad. Neither of them had lawyers. Claudia told the judge I was using the legal system to punish her for disagreeing with me about the inheritance. She said she hadn't threatened me. She'd just asked for her fair share of grandmother's estate. The judge asked if Claudia understood that the probate court had already ruled the inheritance belonged entirely to me. Claudia said yes, but the probate court was wrong and she was hoping I'd correct that mistake voluntarily. The judge asked what part of my sister refusing to leave my apartment building after being asked, yelling threats, and saying she knew where I worked constituted non-threatening behavior. Claudia said she'd been upset and hadn't meant the comments as threats. The judge read aloud from my statement about Claudia saying my family would get the money one way or another. The judge asked Claudia to explain what that phrase meant if not a threat. Claudia had no answer. The judge granted the permanent restraining order. Claudia was prohibited from contacting me directly or indirectly, coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace, or discussing me on social media. If she violated the order, she'd be arrested. I thought the restraining order would end things, but 2 months later, Aaron showed up at my workplace. I was in a meeting when my phone buzzed with a text from the reception desk saying my brother was in the lobby asking to see me. I went cold. Aaron knew where I worked because Claudia must have told him before the restraining order. I told my supervisor what was happening and she called building security immediately. Security escorted Aaron out of the building and told him he wasn't allowed on the premises. I filed a police report documenting the incident and sent a copy to the court handling Claudia's restraining order case. The judge added Aaron to the restraining order based on this new harassment. My entire family was now legally prohibited from contacting me. I changed my social media settings to maximum privacy. I told my employer to screen all calls and visitors. I was living in fear again, waiting for the next family member to show up demanding money I didn't owe them. My therapist, a woman named Dr. Sandra Kim, who I'd started seeing after moving to Portland, said my family's behavior was characteristic of financial abusers who viewed family members as resources rather than individuals. They don't see you as a person with rights, Iris. They see you as someone who has something they want. This will continue until they accept the legal reality or until there are serious consequences for their harassment. The serious consequences came 3 months later when Dad showed up at my apartment building at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. He got past the doorman by claiming he was making a delivery. The doorman let him into the building but not up to my floor. Dad apparently decided to wait in the stairwell hoping to catch me when I left for the day. I left my apartment at 9 a.m. to go grocery shopping and found him sitting on the stairs between the first and second floors. He stood up when he saw me and blocked my path. "We need to talk, Iris. This has gone on long enough. You need to stop hiding behind lawyers and restraining orders and face your family. What you did was wrong and you know it. Grandmother would be ashamed of you for tearing apart the family over money." I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 while backing up toward my apartment door. Dad grabbed my wrist and said he wasn't letting me call the police. I yanked my arm free and screamed for help. Several neighbors opened their doors and Dad let go of me immediately. The 911 dispatcher asked what my emergency was, and I said my father had grabbed me and was violating a restraining order. Dad said he hadn't violated anything because the restraining order was only for Claudia and Aaron. I told the dispatcher my father had physically grabbed me and was trespassing in my building. Officers arrived within 15 minutes and arrested my father for assault and criminal trespass. The arrest made news because local media picked up the story of a father being arrested for harassing his daughter over a $500,000 inheritance. The article detailed the probate case, the restraining orders, and the pattern of harassment spanning 9 months. The article quoted Judge Kowalski's ruling that the will was valid and described my grandmother's letter explaining why she'd left everything to me. It quoted the police reports documenting my family's escalating behavior. It quoted my attorney Patricia saying this case illustrated how families could become abusive when money was involved. The article went viral locally and then got picked up by a national news aggregator. Suddenly, my family's behavior was being discussed by thousands of people online who were horrified by how they'd treated me. My family got destroyed in the comments. People called them greedy, abusive, manipulative, and cruel. Several commenters shared their own stories of family members trying to steal inheritances. The story became a cautionary tale about what happens when families prioritize money over relationships. My father was charged with assault, criminal trespass, and violation of a restraining order. He pled guilty to all charges and received probation, a fine, and mandatory anger management classes. The judge added him to the permanent restraining order and warned that any further contact with me would result in jail time. After Dad's arrest, my family finally stopped. I didn't hear from any of them for 6 months. I started to relax, started to believe I was actually safe. I decorated my apartment. I got promoted at work. I started dating someone I'd met through friends who knew nothing about my family drama. His name was Marcus. Wait, I can't use that name. His name was Julian, and he was a software engineer who'd moved to Portland from California. We'd been dating for 3 months when I finally told him about my family and the inheritance. Julian listened to the whole story without interrupting and then said my family sounded absolutely insane and he was glad I'd gotten away from them. He asked if I thought they'd ever accept what happened and leave me alone. I said I didn't know, but I hoped the legal consequences had finally taught them there were limits to what they could do. Julian said that in his experience, people who believed they were entitled to things they hadn't earned rarely changed their minds no matter how many times they were told no. Your family believes that inheritance should have been theirs. They're probably never going to accept the reality that your grandmother chose you. Be prepared for them to keep trying in different ways. He was right. In month 7, I got a Facebook message from a distant cousin I barely knew named Violet. The message said she was sad about the family rift and hoped we could reconnect. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another distant relative messaged me saying similar things. Then another. I realized my immediate family was using extended family members to try to establish contact with me since they couldn't do it themselves because of the restraining orders. I blocked every family member I could identify on social media and changed my settings so only confirmed friends could message me. But the attempts continued through other channels. Someone signed me up for a mailing list using my grandmother's name, and I started receiving mail addressed to her at my apartment. Someone called my employer claiming to be from a professional reference checking service and asking detailed questions about my employment. My supervisor recognized it as suspicious and refused to provide information. Someone left a note on my car windshield saying families should forgive each other, and I was being stubborn by maintaining the restraining orders. I documented everything and sent it all to the police, but there was no way to prove who was behind the indirect contact. Dr. Kim said this was classic escalation behavior from abusers who'd been blocked from direct contact. They're probing for weaknesses in your boundaries. They're trying to find ways around the legal protections you've established. The fact that they're this persistent after 9 months and legal consequences tells you everything you need to know about their priorities. They care more about the money than they care about you. That's not going to change. She asked if I'd considered leaving Portland entirely and moving somewhere even more remote where my family would have a harder time finding me. I said I'd built a life here and didn't want to keep running. Dr. Kim said that was valid, but I needed to accept that my family might never stop trying to get to me. 1 year after I'd inherited the money, my family made their final attempt. Mom showed up at my workplace. She got into the building by claiming she had a meeting with someone on a different floor. She waited in the lobby until I came down for lunch. I saw her standing by the elevators and turned around immediately. She called my name and followed me. Security intercepted her before she could reach me, and I told them she was violating a restraining order. They detained her while I called the police. Mom was arrested for the second time in a year. This time, the judge gave her 30 days in jail for willfully violating a court order after being explicitly warned that further violations would result in incarceration. Mom served 23 days and was released early for good behavior. When she got out, she posted on Facebook that she'd been imprisoned for trying to talk to her daughter and that the legal system was corrupt. The post got no sympathy. People who knew about the case commented that she'd been arrested for stalking and harassment after a year of refusing to respect court orders. Former friends told her she needed to accept that I had every right to protect myself from her abuse. The public judgment seemed to finally break through her denial. Or maybe it was the jail time that made the consequences real. Either way, the harassment stopped. I haven't heard from any of my family in over a year now. The restraining orders are still in effect and will be for another 2 years. I used the inheritance exactly as my grandmother intended. I paid off my student loans and my car. I invested the majority in a diversified portfolio for retirement. I kept $50,000 liquid for emergencies. I started a small scholarship fund at my grandmother's high school for students pursuing careers in nursing, which had been her profession. The scholarship is given annually in her name, and the recipients never know I fund it. I bought her headstone the epitaph I chose. She gave dignity to others and earned loyalty in return. I visit her grave every few months and tell her about my life. I tell her the house sold for a good price and the money is being used wisely. I tell her I'm safe and happy and building the life she wanted me to have. I tell her thank you for seeing me when no one else in the family did. I tell her I understand now that she was protecting me with that will because she knew exactly what my family would do. She knew they'd try to steal from me, and she made sure there were legal protections in place. She knew I'd need a lawyer, and she made sure Patricia was prepared to fight for me. She knew I'd be pressured to give up what was mine, and she wrote that letter to the court explaining her choices so there could be no ambiguity about her intentions. My grandmother saved me not just with the inheritance, but with the way she structured it to be legally defensible. She gave me the tools I needed to fight back against my family's abuse. Julian and I got engaged last month. He proposed during a hike in the Columbia River Gorge. He said he'd never met anyone as strong as me, and he wanted to spend his life with someone who knew how to stand up for herself. We're planning a small wedding with just close friends, no family. Julian's parents and sister are wonderful people who've welcomed me warmly and never asked intrusive questions about my background. They know I'm estranged from my family, and they've respected that boundary completely. Julian's mom told me she was estranged from her own sister over a similar inheritance dispute years ago, and she understood how painful family betrayal could be. She said the hardest part was accepting that the people who should love you unconditionally sometimes love money more. She said it took her years to stop hoping her sister would change and apologize. Eventually, you realize that waiting for an apology is giving them power over your life. The freedom comes when you accept they're never going to change and you stop expecting them to. That conversation helped me let go of the last bit of hope I'd been holding that my family might somehow recognize what they'd done and make amends. They're never going to change. They're never going to admit they were wrong. They're never going to see me as anything other than the person who took what they believed was theirs. And that's okay because I don't need their validation anymore. 2 years after inheriting, my life is unrecognizable from where I was. I have a career I love, a partner who respects me, financial security, and peace. My family has legal consequences, public shame, and each other. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.